when you watch this and I say English Revolution, I don't mean that. I mean the English Civil War. I'm not an idiot. I just want to tell you that. So, enjoy. Hello. I haven't brushed my hair or anything. I saw an opportunity to make a video and I took it because the kids are busy. Today, that's why my hair's not brushed out. Today's a collab with Shelby from Armors&Arrows. I looked down because I wanted to make sure I said the channel right. Armors&Arrows. It's a bit of a tongue twister, that one, isn't it? I'm going to link it in the description box below. She does homeschool, living with blindness, chickens, and they start their own little homestead, I think. And what we're doing today is how I teach history. Hear me out. Oh, sorry, if you're new here, if you've come from Shelby's channel, my name's Victoria. I've got 4 children that I homeschool or home educate, whichever term you prefer. There's a fly in here that's going to wind me up. My channel's mostly homeschool, but I do a few body confidence interviews. I do a few hauls, a few meals of the week, but it's mostly homeschool. Today we're doing how I teach history. Now, you never see me quote my dad on this channel. So this is a one-off. I remember really clearly my dad saying, I can't remember where we were or what we was doing. I just remember really clearly him saying that history is the most boring subject if it's not taught properly. And he was lucky at school because he had a history teacher that was a bit, I can't remember if he said he had like wild hair and he was a bit mad, and he was so into history, and he didn't just sit them down with a book. It was like, let's go to the castle, and it was just so passionate about the subject that it rubbed off on people, and that's how history should be taught. I just remember him saying that because my experience at school was so different to that. It wasn't so bad at primary school where it was a bit more, you know, crafts and stuff, but at secondary school or high school if you're in America, it really was just a case of copying random dates out of a textbook. I don't think I learned anything about history at school. But I am really into history, particularly areas of history I'm interested in. And that started when I was about 11. So, and who taught me history that way was my mother. Because she let me follow my interests and did a lot of the things I'm about to tell, but not on purpose. It's just the way, you know, it's just what happened. I don't think she'd initially sat down and thought, right, I'm going to teach history by doing this. It just happened that way. So I know it works this way because I'm really into history. So I don't use textbooks. I do use the odd book, like this one, Tony Robinson's The Worst Jobs in History, which I'll show you in a minute. And I've got a few other little books, but I don't use textbooks, because the thing is, if you use textbooks, to me, or if you only use textbooks, you could use textbooks and do the other things I'm about to tell you, but if you only use textbooks, what are you learning? It's just a load of random dates and events in history, which you might remember, you might not. I think to learn history properly, to feel it, you need human interest. And the way you can do human interest is talk about these people like they were real people, because they were. I'll just give you a quick example. This book, Tony Robinson's The Worst Jobs in History, there's a section in it about the workhouse in Victorian England. And there's a photo of the inmates, I don't know if you can see it. But after the photo, there's a list of people that were admitted to the workhouse on this particular day. So instead of just saying, oh, look at all them names, we looked through it, and then we found George Shirley, age 1, male, pauper. Ellen Shirley, unmarried, 20, female, pauper. Right? So then I says, so you've got a young, unmarried woman, 1-year-old baby. So what's happened there? Has she had a baby unmarried and no one will help her, and she's ended up in the workhouse? But that baby's 1, so she must have really wanted that baby, prepared to face, you know, everything that was going on, because she kept it for a whole year. And why, after a whole year, did they go into the workhouse? Did she try for a whole year and it become too hard, and then she was took into the workhouse? Did she have support? Maybe an older person, that person died, and then she had to go into the workhouse. Did the person who was helping her suddenly decide they weren't helping her anymore because the social pressures and people being nasty to them because of it become too much? There's a whole family in here. There's a mother. If you can tell from the ages, it's the mother, and then a lot of children. No mention of the father. And you know, we said, why has that happened? Has the father died? And we can link both those things to people we know now. Like there's somebody we know now, a young woman with a baby or married, and you know, she's fine. No one's took it off her, no one's judging her, because that's how much social attitudes and government guidelines and things like that have moved on since then. Same as we know somebody where the parent died. This didn't happen to him. You know what I mean? If you link it to things that are happening now, people you know now, it helps them to put it into this perspective of their real people, what they must have felt, how it affected them, how it was unfair, rather than just a load of dates. I'm very into historical fiction for children. I love the Jacqueline Wilson Hetty Feather series, because when you're reading children a book or watching a film, TV program, whatever, the children are emotionally invested in that character. They care about that character. They're following that character's journey, and along the way they pick up, you know, the historical setting, why that happened to them, why that person felt like that towards them, why they felt that way, because that's how history was then. But they don't realise they're learning, they're just following that character. Human interest. Same as if you watch, I mean, you got to be careful with period dramas, because some of them are right racy now, and some of them are wildly historically inaccurate. But then again, if you know the inaccuracies, you can watch it and then with your children and then say, well, that's not right, why did they change it, this is probably why, you know. But if you watch some of these historical dramas with your children, it's all very well reading a book, but you can't see things. For you to read an historical fiction and have the correct setting in your head, you need to have seen the everyday things they do then, what things look like then, which television does a wonderful job of. Because as well as you've got this story unfolding between these characters, you can see all the everyday items they used, the kind of places they lived, the clothes they wore. You're soaking in so much just by looking. And another one that's great, there was a lot of them on when I was little, and I think that's one of the things I used to watch with my mum, and it hooked me into history. They still make programmes like that, but not as much. Programmes where they take modern people and they put them in a historical setting. They've got to live that way, and how they react, compare, like, you know, how different things have become because of how they react to it, how they're not used to it. When I was little, there was 1900 house where they sent a family to live as Victorians for a couple of months in this house. It was all done out like Victorian times. 1940s house, which they had to live like they was in World War II for a couple of months. Yeah, there was just loads, and there's still some now on telly, or you can find things like that. Again, human interest, it's interesting. And I tell you another way to teach history: go to places, go to museums, go to castles, go to places like that. Let the kids look, and it gives, you know, they do soak it in. They might not, that's the other thing, they might not soak everything in. Don't overdo it. If you're constantly on about it, it's just gonna be one massive random things in their head. Excuse me, don't overdo it. You don't have to keep shoving it in their head. I tell you another great way of teaching history: storytelling. There are so many amazing stories in not just English history all over the world, but we're in England, so I'm just going to say in England. English history, especially between the kings and queens, things that have happened. And just tell them the stories of what happened. I mean, King Edward VI had his brother drowned in a barrel of Malmsey wine, or I think Malmsey wine, something wine. All kinds of stories, amazing stories. And that's where schools go wrong. It's too dry, and they go on about the same period in history all the time. The Tudors is a good thing to study, but it's done to death. That's the only thing they teach in secondary school in England. And it's like, what about the War of the Roses? What about World War One? What about the English Revolution? What about Guy Fawkes? What about... There's so many things they could teach. Margaret of Anjou. There's so many things they could teach, and they just teach the Tudors all the time on a loop. So many things. And I'll tell you one last one before I go, because I'll rant. Genealogy. You know, your family tree. Find out your family's history and the stories of it. Tell it your kids, because they'll be interested, because it's their family, and you end up telling them things that have happened in history. My dad was in the miners' strike in the 1980s in England, and I tell them about that, teach them about the miners' strike in England. My mum was a GPO girl, and she ended up leaving because there was computerising it and getting rid of people. It's another piece of English history. My great granddad was a bigamist. He had over 20 children with 2 different women. When one of the women died, he went to my great grandma and said, well, my other wife's died, you're going to have to look after her kids as well. So my great grandma ended up looking after over 20 kids in a 2-bedroomed house with an outside toilet. And that's just show. And when the kids say, well, why did she do that? I'm like, well, in them days you couldn't just leave your husband, or if you did just leave your husband you were destitute. Why couldn't they get a bigger house? Money, and in them days you just had to manage. That's how it was then. My granddad joined the Navy age 14. That's another thing. You say, well, why did you do that? You can't join the Navy age 14. Yeah, but you could then. Do you know what I mean? It's a great way of teaching them history, and it keeps it personable because it's about your family. So that's how I teach history. And when they're little as well, lots of crafts. Like we were doing Viking conquer soap the other day, so we learned a bit about the Vikings, and we learned that, you know, their boats were narrow, so that they were long and they were narrow, so that they could go up streams as well and surprise villagers from behind and attack them. So we made like these Viking boats that went long and narrow. So crafts if they're little. Don't be afraid to use films and telly, because they can teach you a lot. Not just documentaries, but period dramas, films. Historical fiction. Tell them stories. Oh, and answer any questions they want while they're interested. It doesn't have to be in a certain setting. We were down the allotment the other day digging up potatoes, and Gabriel, my oldest, who's 9, just asked me about Auschwitz. And I was like, I don't really want to talk about concentration camps while I'm digging up potatoes, but because he'd asked me, it was clearly in his head. So we ended up having a long conversation about it down the allotment, and I know he'd retained more because he was in that moment in his head where he wanted to know. Yeah, so anytime, any place, visit places, just keep that level of human interest up, because that is what touches you, that's what gets you interested. And also, of course, if there's a period of history they take shine to, go for it and just learn all about that period of history. Because if you're really interested, you'll become a life learner on it, and you'll be interested in it. Like my husband's an amateur ripperologist. There's not a lot he doesn't know about Jack the Ripper, because that's what he's interested in, and he's taught himself. So yeah, that's how I teach history anyway. I have a tendency to ramble. Thank you for watching. If you're new here, please subscribe, because well, it do make me happy. I'll see you next time with a brand new video. Bye bye.